It's hard to hear any great song, even well sung, without hearing every time you've heard it elsewise. So I sat here not only hearing Kirsten sing, I also was hearing Marian Anderson running at the same time, which is a good thing. It's like a great duet in your heart. I love that. And I'm pleased that I had that good feeling, and also being reminded by Jason's words about courage. Of course, I'm of an age that you can't say the word courage without thinking of Bert Lahr and the Cowardly Lion. I'm still wondering what put the ape in apricot. It's good to think about those things today, because actually it was a rough week for me. I don't know about you. Sunday last week, which was a great moment here. I go home and there's water dripping through my windows onto my walls, puckering the paint, and then down to the first floor, and there are now towels in very important locations, because until all the snow is gone, it's going to do that. And speaking of snow, how many times did you shovel this week? Monday, the cold was so intense I couldn't shovel. In fact, it was so cold we didn't even open the office. It was just dreadful. Somewhere around Monday night or Tuesday, I remembered the beginning of Moby Dick, where it starts, "Call me Ishmael." Do you know what it says after that? When Ishmael says, "Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul." And remember, it's still January, so if November is bad, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can, and we're off. Of course, we are far from the sea here, and I do have my snow shovel, that helps. But when you can't even snow shovel, well, the distance between hope and despair gets very narrow in the winter, doesn't it? My message this week and every week is important, because somewhere someone needs a word of hope and courage. Sometimes even the preacher needs it. And so maybe today my message is as much for me as it is for you. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my redeemer. Speaking of the weather, the local legend I heard, and I'm only 9 years here, so I'm a newcomer, was that the Dutch immigrants who came to West Michigan stayed here because it resembled home in many ways. Flat, wet, and plenty of cold, gray winter days. My inner Ishmael wonders if their devout Calvinism was also nurtured by the climate here and there. What could be more flat and gray and wintry than the well-known TULIP acronym? Mark Oppenheimer of the New York Times wrote recently, "The T is for man's total depravity. The U is for unconditional election, which means that God has already decided who will be saved without regard to any condition in them or anything they can do to earn their salvation. The acronym gets no cheerier from there," he says. He was writing a column recently about what he calls the new Calvinists. Now, we're used to being behind the cultural times here in West Michigan. We tend to be the last ones to get the news about anything hip, cool, trendy, or otherwise. But it turns out that we're at the front of a theological trend. Calvinism is cool again amongst young evangelicals. Two other Marks named Driscoll and Deaver, younger, hipper, dungarees wearing tattooed preachers, are gathering big crowds in their mega churches in Portland, Oregon, and in Washington, D.C., drawing in thousands to hear about sin and evil and other unpleasant facts. And they're not alone. What gives? I'll come back to that question. For the last 3 weeks, if you haven't been here, I've reviewed the essential mission of liberal religion, which is to free the mind and grow the soul and change the world. Something I do actually every January. I think of them as my spiritual New Year's resolutions. Being part of Fountain Street Church is a commitment to do this sort of thing for yourself, to help others, and to be in a community that does it for the wider community. To be part of Fountain Street Church in any sense is to make yourself in some sense accountable to these ideas. Inwardly, for yourself, and outwardly in the way you live. It's what they call in more conventional churches discipleship. Now, that probably makes a few hairs stand on end, and that's okay. I'll come back to that so you can keep your back up for a little while longer. Because I'm challenging the assumption that a free church like ours that doesn't have a particular creed or a set of beliefs also has no rules or expectations. It's a come-as-you-are party, a potluck in every sense of the word. And it turns out that challenging that notion is not unique to me. I have a colleague, woman's name is Anna Levy-Lyons. She writes for the Huffington Post and is the successor to me in my Brooklyn church. I'm envious of her writing gifts and of her ability to get Arianna Huffington's official approval. Recently, she wrote in a column about religious liberals, that would be us. What would it look like, she says, if instead of advertising religion light, religious liberals became the most observant religious people around? What if those of us who consider ourselves theologically liberal began joining liberal religious communities in droves? What if we began tithing to those institutions? What if we observed the Sabbath and radically disengaged from social and economic structures every week? What if we engaged in the serious study of our spiritual texts and heritage and applied their lessons to the issues of today? What if we began lobbying on religious grounds for environmental stewardship? What if? What if? And how could that happen? Well, these past 3 weeks, I've been arguing, less eloquently, I fear, that we need to set some higher spiritual expectations, that you should become religiously literate, not religiously indifferent, that you should become spiritually fluent, not spiritually flaccid, that you should become morally competent, not politically aggravated. Just because we don't worship the Bible doesn't mean we don't study it or other powerful texts. Just because we don't have creeds and prayers and rituals doesn't mean we have no religious practices or rituals. And just because we don't tell you what to believe about moral issues doesn't mean they don't matter or that you should not be involved with them. As I think about it, I think that's the appeal of the new Calvinists is not their doctrinal stuff with all their total depravity running amok, but the demand to take something seriously in a world that cheapens us into advertising and trends and clothing and television and who won what award this week somewhere in Hollywood. People like Mark Driscoll and Mark Deaver are not really about how sinful you are, but how real life really is a challenge. Difficult. It is not always rewarding. It's entirely confusing, and we sometimes don't know what the blazes is going on. And any religion that does not ask people to man up, as some people say, or as I've heard elsewhere, put on your big boy pants, is not worth considering, is it? And I fear that's something liberal religion has fallen into, a kind of anything goes, whatever you want, we don't care, it doesn't matter, please yourself sort of religion, which for someone like me who has spent his entire life leading a movement that doesn't want to do anything gets a little annoying from time to time. Yes, I've spent my life doing this stuff. And it is frustrating when I go out into the world and I tell them I serve at Fountain Street Church or whatever church I used to serve, and they say, that's not a real church. That's annoying. I get defensive. But what's really annoying is when people in those churches say, we're not a real church. When we say we don't have a religion, we're not like that. If you don't take it seriously, why should anyone else? Now, I've told jokes about it. I just did. And we all laughed. But I secretly hope you're a little embarrassed too. That you're a little mortified that we can have this reputation of being morally, spiritually, intellectually indifferent to the things that matter to other people. That doesn't mean we agree, but indifferent.